Thank you. Today I'd like to talk about what influences consumers in the age of nearly perfect information. But before we get there, let's take a minute to review what we used to believe about consumers. In the beginning, the assumption was that consumers are generally rational, but they often cannot tell the quality of things, and therefore marketers could influence them using branding, advertising, loyalty building, and the other tools covered in the marketing textbook. Then, about 25 years ago, it got a little more interesting. More and more studies started showing that consumers often make irrational decisions. In fact, that's what I worked on for about the first 20 years of my career. This is an article I published in the New York Times back in 1994, and I think the title tells you what it was about and who I felt was in control at that time. Today I'm only going to talk about one of the many irrational influences on consumer decision. This is, I called that the compromise effect back in the mid-80s. And this particular example is taken from a study done in '91 with the late psychologist Amos Tversky. In this case, one group of consumers was asked to choose between these two cameras. As you can see, one is more expensive and has more features. Here, most consumers took the less expensive one. A second group of consumers was asked to choose among these three cameras. The top two are the same that you saw before. The third one is even more expensive and has more features. What happened? The big winner here was the middle option, the compromise. That means many consumers shifted to the middle one. What does that tell us? It tells us that consumers were not choosing based on the quality of the product, its value, its features, or price. They were choosing based on the location of this particular compromise in this particular set. Now, a year ago, a doctoral student at Stanford, Tali Reich, and I decided to replicate this study. But this time, we decided to add some information, the kind of information you find on websites such as Amazon. So even though you don't see it here, we included reviews, we showed other cameras that are available, and we provided more information. Again, you can see we have here one group that chose between these two cameras, and a second group that chose among these three cameras, the first two that you already saw, and the third one. The compromise effect was gone. Consumers were no longer favoring the middle option. Well, it means that they were less likely to choose based on relative position in the set. The significance of this finding goes well beyond the compromise effect because most consumer decisions until recently were based on relative evaluations. Imagine that you were buying a laptop computer in 1999. Your assessment of quality might have been influenced by the brand name, your prior experience with the brand, its price, where it was made, where it was sold, and so on. You might have also relied on some general rules, such as you get what you pay for. These are all relative evaluations, relative to other products by the same brand, relative to other products at the same price level, or other products made in the same country. These proxies are not, however, very accurate predictors of actual quality. They just tell you to rely on relative assessments. So what we see now is that increasingly consumers do not have to rely on relative evaluations, and they often know what they get before they get it, and they can assess the quality of the product specifically. These are just a few of the quality indicators that we have today that allow us to evaluate the quality of the product that we want to buy. Now, if you think about the marketing textbook and what we teach marketers, a lot of that has to do with the creation of effective relative cues or quality proxies. But they are not very accurate. And once consumers are able to evaluate each product based on its individual quality instead of relying on relative evaluations, the power of marketers and their quality proxies declines. We can think about the three key forces that influence consumers' decisions. P are prior preferences, anything that's already in our head, our prior experiences, our attitudes, tendencies that we were born with, other information that we have from before. Then there is the power or the influence of marketers, advertising, branding, and so on. And there is the influence of other people, friends, social media and otherwise, and strangers. There is information from experts. There is a great deal of information. In fact, if you want to know what has happened in the past 10, 15 years, it's a shift from M to O. At the same time, there is probably also been a shift in the power from P to O. In other words, our tendency to rely on our own prior experiences declines when we have great information from others about quality, all those reviews, expert reviews, stranger reviews, demonstrations, and all those information from others. The degree to which consumers rely on information from others varies greatly across products and services and across consumer segments for a given product. This is a simplified representation of the degree to which consumers rely on O and the degree to which there has been a shift to O. The rest of my talk will focus on the rapidly increasing number of categories in which decisions rely to a large degree on information from others. What we'll do is we'll see what are the implications of this trend for the basic concepts of marketing. And I'll talk today about branding, loyalty, irrationality, positioning and persuasion, and market research. Let's start with brand. And that's probably the biggest mantra. There is nothing more marketing than branding. And the belief in the power of brands remains strong. In fact, there are people out there, quite a few, who say that exactly because of the vast amount of information out there, consumers get overloaded and the power of brands increases. This argument is based on the presumption that consumers have really two choices. Either they process all of the information out there, in which case they get overloaded, or they ignore all the information and rely on brands. Of course, in reality, consumers have many intermediate and better solutions. You can very quickly get a great deal of information about quality without processing all of the information. You can very quickly figure out that there are 400 reviews of something with average of 4.5 stars. If you are interested in what those who do not like the product are saying, you can very quickly glance at those. You can quickly look at reviews of experts. It doesn't take that much effort or time. So now, I'm not saying that brands will no longer exist. brands have other important functions. For example, brands will continue to communicate status. However, the use of brands for assessing quality will decline because there are better information sources available to consumers today. Let me give you one example from a study conducted by Michael Luca. Luca was interested in the impact of reviews on revenues, and he studied it in the context of restaurants in Seattle. He had access to information about the revenues of restaurants, independent and chain restaurants, before and after Yelp entered that market. He also had information to the content of reviews about individual restaurants. He had two main findings. One is that each additional Yelp star increases revenues by about 5%. More interesting in the context of our research is that increased penetration of Yelp tends to increase the revenues of independent restaurants and decrease the revenues of chain restaurants. Why? Well, once you can use reviews to assess or to predict the quality of independent restaurants, chain restaurants are losing their main advantage, namely that you know in advance what you'll get regardless of location. Now, this has many implications. Johnny Shih, the CEO of Asus, told us that when he decided to introduce, to sell his products direct to consumers, instead of just selling under the Asus name, instead of selling just components for other manufacturers, people told him that he would not be successful without brand recognition and without spending a lot of money on advertising. Well, as you may know, by certainly 2012, Asus was among the leaders in markets such as laptops and tablets. When consumers can assess quality, they can recognize value whether or not the name is well known. The same also applies to new names that enter new categories, like Roku with its streaming player, and the company that's been very much in the news in the past couple of days, Nest, that entered a market also that's where they compete with some very large companies. Another important implication has to do with the ease of diversification. We used to teach our students that each brand is associated with certain skills. So if your brand is well established in one category, don't try to enter another category because it just doesn't fit. That's no longer true, because when consumers can evaluate each product on its own value, then as long as you introduce a good product in another category, that's fine, you will do well. Let's talk about loyalty, and you might have heard a great deal about the importance of loyalty and the tremendous impact of investment in loyalty on profitability. If you can build loyalty, it's the greatest entry barrier for your competitors. Well, that's becoming less true, because I may love my car, but next time that I'm going to buy a new car, I'm just going to look around and see what people are saying about my brand's car and other cars. I'm much less likely to say, well, I really like their previous car, I have to buy the same car again. Each one is evaluated on its own. Again, this has many important implications. The importance is of the current product instead of your previous successes, and never rest on your laurels. On the bright side, if you failed with one product, it's not the end of the world. If your next product is good, you will be successful because consumers will recognize that. There are common measures of loyalty. Those of you who are marketing are familiar with those. They're becoming less important. Marketers and market researchers invested a lot of time and money in measuring loyalty and brand attitudes, but these become less important. Let's talk about market research. As you know, much of market research is about measuring consumers' wants and preferences today in order to predict what they will want in the future. Well, that's becoming also less useful. Why? Because when consumers will make their decisions, they make their decisions based on information available at the time of purchase, which they can obtain from others, from all kinds of sources. Their prior wants, or whatever was measured at the time of market research, is much weaker predictor of the decisions they will ultimately make. Which means that marketers should spend less time measuring prior beliefs and prior preferences and perceptions, or loyalty or brand perceptions. Instead, they should spend more time tracking what others, influential others, are saying. And marketers are, to a large degree, already started doing that, knowing up to the minute what O is saying. Another thing that we can do better today is conduct quick experiments using big and small data. We can run quick experiments, see the results, make adjustments, and run new experiments. That's much more effective than today measuring perceptions and introducing a product based on that a year later. So let's just review what we talked about today. The main change is, as I said, from relative to absolute value-based decisions, and the related shift from the power of marketers to the power of information from others. We talked about the changes in branding, the decrease in importance of brands in terms of assessing quality, the decreased importance of loyalty, the decreased susceptibility to what we used to call irrationality, decreased importance, positioning, persuasion, and the changes in market research. So to conclude, the changed environment really changed the fundamentals of marketing and consumer decision-making. Consumers increasingly know what they get before they get it. They can assess absolute value. Relative quality proxies that I talked about, like brands, prices, where it's made, and so on, they're becoming less important. The power of marketers overall is declining, and their key leftover roles include tracking O, making adjustments, and acting accordingly in order to influence consumers through O as much as they can. Thank you.